I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember the exact smell of the fresh tatami mats in your childhood home, warming under the afternoon sun. Listen closely. Can you hear the rhythmic, high-pitched horn of the tofu vendor slowly pedaling his bicycle down your narrow neighborhood street? Welcome back to a time that lives only in our memories now. Today, we are going to talk about 20 perfectly normal things from the 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s in Japan. These were everyday habits, rituals, and ways of life that we never thought twice about. Yet, if you tried to do them today, you would face steep fines, absolute public outrage, or you would be breaking the law entirely. Stay with me until the very end, because the final memory we will uncover is perhaps the most touching, a beautiful piece of our shared youth that is gone forever, but still aches in the heart. Back in those days, the flow of time felt entirely different. It moved slower, heavier, and without the frantic, breathless rushing that dictates modern life. We were in the middle of the great Japanese economic miracle. But despite the rapid growth of the cities, our neighborhoods still felt deeply connected. We lived in a world where waiting was a virtue, not a frustration. We waited for letters, we waited by the rotary phone for a call, and we waited for our favorite television programs to air at a specific hour. There is a modern myth that without the instant technology and strict safety regulations of today, our lives were somehow poorer or less civilized. But you and I know the truth. Our lives were infinitely richer in sincerity. We relied on the trust of our neighbors, the warmth of the local community, and a shared understanding of common sense. Yes, the world was a little rougher around the edges, and perhaps a lot more dangerous, but that very danger allowed us to experience a profound sense of freedom. We lived raw, unfiltered lives, deeply connected to the changing of the seasons and to each other. Let us begin by remembering the thick, swirling blue haze that used to fill the air inside the commuter trains and airplanes of our youth. Back in the 1970s, smoking was not just a personal habit, it was an ever-present, unifying ritual in Japanese daily life. Do you remember standing on the platform of the Yamanote line, the humid summer air completely saturated with the smell of peace or highlight cigarettes? There were no glass-enclosed, designated smoking areas back then, just a collective cloud of tobacco smoke that wrapped around everyone on the platform. On long-distance Shinkansen journeys, every single velvet seat had a tiny, heavy metal ashtray built directly into the armrest. You could hear the constant metallic snapping of lighters and the striking of matches echoing down the aisle, mixing perfectly with the rhythmic clatter of the train tracks. People smoked everywhere. They smoked in hospital waiting rooms, in crowded movie theaters, and even while holding their infant children on their laps. Today, doing this would not only result in a hefty fine, but it would cause absolute panic and public outrage. Yet back then, offering a light to a stranger on a crowded train was a perfectly normal way to start a conversation. It was a small, quiet moment of human connection, born entirely in a shared cloud of smoke. Now, let us think about the autumn afternoons and the fading practice of burning neighborhood garbage, a ritual we called takibi. Before the era of strict environmental laws and municipal incinerators, the changing of the seasons was marked by the smell of smoke rising between the wooden houses. When the leaves fell from the persimmon trees, or when a family had excess paper waste, they would simply sweep it all into a small pile in the street or their backyard. Do you remember the sharp, earthy crackle of the dry leaves catching fire? The smoke would drift lazily through the neighborhood, carrying with it the sweet, unmistakable aroma of roasting sweet potatoes wrapped in foil and buried in the hot ashes. Neighbors would gather around these small fires, sweeping their steps, warming their hands, and exchanging local gossip as the sun went down. It was a communal gathering point, a place to check in on the elderly and the young. Today, lighting an open fire in a residential street violates numerous fire and air quality laws. The police or the fire department would be called immediately. But we lost something when we lost the takibi. We lost those spontaneous twilight conversations, and we lost the true, smoky scent of a Japanese autumn. Do you recall the feeling of absolute, untamed freedom when riding in the open bed of a light commercial truck? In the Showa era, the small, rattling K-trucks like the Daihatsu Hijet or the Subaru Samba were the lifeblood of rural and suburban Japan. When a family needed to go to the local festival or a group of children needed a ride back from the baseball field, we would all just pile into the back of the open truck bed. There were no seat belts, no padded seats, and certainly no safety regulations protecting us. We just sat on the cold, ribbed metal floor, gripping the side panels as the truck bounced along unpaved dirt roads. I can still remember the wind roaring in my ears, whipping my hair around, and the intense smell of exhaust fumes mixing with the scent of the nearby rice paddies. We would wave to people walking on the side of the road, feeling like kings of the world as we sped along. Today, allowing passengers, especially young children, to ride in the cargo bed of a truck is highly illegal and considered incredibly reckless. But for those of us who grew up then, it remains one of our most thrilling childhood memories, a raw experience of joy that modern children, strapped tightly into their car seats, will never get to know. Let us turn our memories to the glowing, brightly lit vending machines that lined the dark streets of our neighborhoods. Back then, it was perfectly normal to buy beer, sake, and cigarettes from vending machines at any hour of the day or night, with absolutely no age verification required. The machines stood on street corners like lonely, humming sentinels, casting a neon glow onto the pavement. Do you remember the heavy, satisfying clunk of a large glass bottle of Sapporo or Kirin beer falling into the dispensing tray? It was a common, everyday errand for a young child, barely 7 or 8 years old, to be sent down the street by their father with a handful of coins to buy a pack of 7 stars and a bottle of sake. The shopkeepers knew the children, the neighborhood watched over them, and nobody questioned a child carrying alcohol back home. Today, strict laws require electronic age verification cards to purchase these items, and selling alcohol to minors is a severe offense. The trust that allowed a child to buy a bottle of whiskey for their grandfather has vanished. It was an era where community trust was our only security, and we all simply looked out for one another in the warm glow of the vending machine lights. We must also remember the very different atmosphere inside the classrooms of our youth. In the 1960s and 70s, physical discipline by teachers was not only common, it was actively supported by parents and the community. We called it binta, the swift, echoing slap across the face, or the sharp sting of a wooden bamboo sword used by the gym teacher. Do you remember the smell of the chalk dust floating in the sunlight of the classroom, and the sudden, terrifying silence that fell over the room when the teacher raised their voice? Teachers were absolute authority figures, respected and feared in equal measure. If you misbehaved, forgot your homework, or talked out of turn, you fully expected to stand in the hallway holding heavy buckets of water or to receive a harsh physical correction. When we went home and told our parents we were hit by the teacher, our parents would usually scold us again, trusting the teacher's judgment completely. Today, such actions would lead to immediate criminal charges for assault, national media scandals, and the instant dismissal of the teacher. While we may not miss the sting of the bamboo stick, we often miss the profound respect and the clear boundaries that shaped our character in those dusty wooden classrooms. Think back to the magical experience of long train journeys on the national railways before the Shinkansen became the only way to travel. Buying a station bento box, or ekiben, was the highlight of the trip. But do you remember what we did when we finished eating? In those days, it was a perfectly normal ritual to open the heavy, rattling train window and throw our empty wooden bento boxes and clay teapot containers directly out of the moving train. The little clay teapots, called kishadobin, were heavy and beautifully crafted, but completely disposable. I can still feel the rush of the rushing wind pushing against my face as I lifted the window sash. We would toss our trash into the wind, watching the cedar wood boxes and clay pots shatter against the gravel tracks or tumble down into the green valleys below. It sounds horrifying to modern environmental sensibilities, and today it would be classified as illegal dumping and heavily penalized. Yet, because the materials were entirely natural, just wood, paper and clay, they simply returned to the earth. It was a carefree gesture, a physical release of our journey, throwing our remnants into the beautiful Japanese countryside as the steam locomotive chugged heavily into the distance. Let us recall the deafening roar and the feeling of the humid summer air when riding motorcycles. Until the traffic laws were severely tightened, riding a motorcycle without a helmet was completely legal and totally normal. Young people riding the iconic Honda Super Cub or large touring bikes would cruise along the Shonan coast or through the mountain passes with the wind blowing wildly through their hair. Do you remember the feeling of the warm night air against your bare face, the smell of the ocean salt, and the absolute thrill of speed without any heavy fiberglass enclosing your head? Even young mothers would ride their scooters down to the market, wearing their sun hats, with zero protective gear. We felt invincible, deeply connected to the environment rushing past us. Today, riding without a DOT-approved helmet is strictly forbidden, punishable by fines and points on your license. The mandatory helmet laws undoubtedly saved thousands of lives, but they also took away that raw, visceral connection to the road. We traded the dangerous, beautiful feeling of the wind in our hair for safety, leaving those bareheaded summer rides solely to our memories. Let us turn on the television of our memories, back to the late-night broadcasts of the Showa era. The programming we watched back then would be completely illegal under today's strict broadcasting ethics and obscenity laws. Do you remember the heavy static of the cathode ray tube television warming up? Shows like the famous LMPM pushed the boundaries of what could be beamed into our living rooms. There was uncensored adult humor, extremely dangerous physical stunts where comedians were genuinely injured, and late-night segments that featured partial nudity on regular, free-to-air channels. The entire country would tune in, sharing a collective, slightly guilty laugh. We did not have parental controls or warning screens. If a child crept down the stairs and peeked around the sliding shoji screen, they saw the unfiltered, chaotic entertainment of the adult world. Today, the broadcasting commissions would heavily fine or shut down any network attempting to air such wild, unregulated content. The television of our youth was loud, offensive, highly inappropriate, and incredibly alive. It was a shared cultural secret that we all participated in, long before the sanitized, heavily regulated media environment of the modern world took over. Let us take a walk down a dark street and remember the glowing red paper lanterns of the neighborhood street food carts. The yatai were a staple of our evening rituals. Whether it was the sweet soy sauce aroma of oden simmering in a square metal vat, or the mournful, high-pitched sound of the charumera flute announcing the arrival of the ramen cart, these vendors were everywhere. But if we look back with modern eyes, the hygiene standards would be considered completely illegal today. The vendors often had no running water. They washed the heavy ceramic ramen bowls in a single plastic bucket of soapy water all night long. The ingredients sat out in the humid air for hours, completely unregulated by modern health departments. Do you remember sitting on a wobbly wooden stool, feeling the heat of the charcoal fire, and eating a steaming bowl of ramen under the stars? We never worried about food poisoning or health permits. The taste was rich, comforting, and deeply satisfying. Today, strict health codes and city ordinances have chased the traditional, unregulated yatai off the streets, replacing them with sanitized, permitted food trucks. We lost a little bit of the night's magic when we regulated the steam and the smoke away. Think about the places where children used to play. In the rapidly developing cities of the 1960s and 70s, empty lots and active construction sites were our absolute favorite playgrounds. We called these vacant spaces akichi. There were no high metal fences, no security cameras, and no bright warning signs telling us to keep out. Do you remember the smell of freshly turned damp earth, the rust on the heavy iron rebars, and the rough texture of stacked concrete pipes? We would spend hours climbing on top of those massive pipes, catching dragonflies, and building elaborate secret bases among the discarded building materials. We played hide and seek inside half-finished houses, completely unaware of the physical dangers surrounding us. Today, allowing children to trespass and play in a commercial construction zone is entirely illegal, and the companies would face massive liability lawsuits if a child were even spotted on the premises. Playgrounds today have soft rubber floors and low, safe equipment, but the akichi was a wild frontier. It taught us balance, risk, and imagination. We came home with scraped knees, dirty faces, and memories of grand adventures that modern children can only experience through video games. Let us remember the sounds and smells of the open neighborhood gutters, the small drainage rivers we called dobugawa. Before the implementation of modern, closed sewage systems and strict environmental water protection laws, it was entirely normal for household grey water to flow directly into the open street ditches. Do you remember the constant babbling sound of water running right in front of your house? Women would crouch by the edge of the dobu to wash root vegetables, scrubbing the mud off daikon radishes directly into the flowing stream. Sometimes, you would see thick, white, soapy water from the family washing machine rushing down the gutter, carrying away the suds of the day. The smell was sometimes pungent, a mix of damp algae, earth, and household soap. Today, discharging untreated household wastewater into an open neighborhood ditch is a severe violation of the water pollution control laws. The rivers have been covered with concrete, and the water is heavily treated. It is much cleaner and safer now, of course, but there was a strange, intimate transparency to seeing the daily life of your neighborhood flowing right past your front door, a watery heartbeat of the community that has been buried underground. Let us turn our gaze to the small, delicate bamboo bird cages that used to hang under the eaves of almost every traditional Japanese house. Back then, it was a beloved hobby for older men to venture into the nearby woods with sticky traps to catch wild songbirds. Do you remember the bright, cheerful chirping of the Japanese white-eye, the mejiro, greeting the morning sun? People would proudly display their wild-caught birds on their porches, feeding them small pieces of fruit and mashed sweet potatoes. The smell of the bamboo cage, mixed with the damp moss placed inside, was the fragrance of a quiet Sunday morning. Men would even gather at local shrines to hold singing contests for their captured birds. Today, the wildlife protection and hunting law strictly prohibits the capture and keeping of these native wild birds. Doing so would result in immediate confiscation and heavy criminal fines. The skies belong entirely to the birds now. Yet when we hear the song of the mejiro hidden deep in the modern city trees, we cannot help but remember the days when that beautiful melody lived right on our front porch, a tiny piece of the wild captured in a fragile wooden cage. Do you remember the heart-pounding thrill of commuting on the streetcars and local buses during rush hour? Long before the doors were legally required to be electronically sealed for safety, we rode on the open footboards of moving vehicles. When the interior of the bus or the tram was completely packed, passengers would simply cling to the metal handrails on the outside, standing on the narrow outer steps. I can still hear the sharp, piercing whistle of the conductor and the electric hum of the streetcar wires. Do you remember the smell of ozone and hot asphalt, and the terrifying, exhilarating feeling of the city streets rushing by just inches from your leather shoes. People would hang on with one arm, balancing their briefcases in the other, completely trusting their own grip to keep them alive. Today, operating a public transit vehicle with open doors and hanging passengers is unthinkable and completely illegal under modern road traffic laws. We are now safely locked behind thick glass and automated doors. But we lost that raw, physical connection to the momentum of the city, that daily test of strength and balance that made simply going to work an absolute adventure. Let us recall the thick, white, sweet-smelling chemical fogs that blanketed our neighborhoods during the humid summers. In the effort to redefine mosquitoes and pests, local municipalities would send trucks through the residential streets to spray heavy pesticides, often containing chemicals like DDT. Do you remember the loud, droning hum of the fogger truck slowly turning the corner? Instead of running away, we children would actually chase the truck. We would run directly into the thick, billowing white smoke, disappearing into the fog like ghosts, laughing and waving our arms. The distinct, synthetic smell of those chemicals was, to us, the official scent of summer vacation. Today, the use of such harsh, unregulated chemicals in residential areas is banned worldwide due to severe health and environmental hazards. Exposing children to a cloud of toxic pesticides would result in massive legal action and public panic. We look back now and shake our heads at the danger we joyfully inhaled. Yet, in that innocent time, we did not know the risks. We only knew the joy of playing hide and seek in a magical white cloud that temporarily erased the streets we knew so well. Think back to the warm summer nights spent on the sandy beaches of our local coastlines. In those days, a family could simply walk down to the water, gather some driftwood, and start a massive bonfire right on the sand. There were no permits required, no security patrols, and no designated fire pits. Do you remember the mesmerizing crackle of the sparks flying up into the dark sky, and the smell of sulfur mixing with the salty ocean breeze as we lit our fireworks? We would hold the delicate Senko Hanabi, the sparklers, watching the tiny, trembling ball of fire until it dropped into the dark sand. People would drink beer, play guitars, and let the fire burn late into the night, leaving the charred wood behind for the tide. Today, lighting an unauthorized open fire or setting off fireworks on most public beaches is strictly illegal, heavily regulated to protect the environment and maintain public order. The beaches at night are now dark and quiet, patrolled by local authorities. The spontaneous magic of claiming a piece of the night shore, warming our hands by a fire we built ourselves, has become a forbidden luxury of the past. Let us remember the arrival of the traveling medicine peddlers, the men from Toyama who walked from door to door. Long before modern, strictly regulated pharmacies took over every street corner, these merchants were our primary source of healthcare. Do you remember the creak of the heavy wicker trunk they carried on their backs? When they opened it on your tatami floor, the entire room would fill with the potent herbal smell of camphor, dried roots, and medicinal plasters. They would leave paper envelopes of traditional medicines, taking back only the empty ones from their last visit. They had no formal medical licenses by today's strict standards, yet our mothers trusted them deeply. They would drink tea, share stories, and diagnose minor ailments just by looking at us. Today, dispensing medicine without a strict pharmaceutical license and proper medical oversight is completely illegal. The intimate trust we placed in a traveling stranger has been replaced by bright, sterile clinics and computerized prescriptions. We traded the warm, lingering smell of the wicker trunk for cold efficiency, losing a beautiful piece of community care in the process. Do you recall the stray dogs that freely roamed our neighborhoods, belonging to no one in particular, but loved by everyone? In the Showa era, before strict animal control laws and leash mandates, dogs were a communal part of the landscape. Do you remember the large, scruffy, mixed-breed dogs sleeping lazily in the cool shadows of the local Shinto shrine? We did not buy expensive dog food in those days. Instead, we would take our leftover white rice, mix it with a little miso soup or fish bones, and leave it in a cracked ceramic bowl by the front gate. The dogs would wander from house to house, serving as unofficial guardians of the streets. Children would pet them, and they would follow us to school. Today, allowing a dog to roam freely without a leash or feeding strays violates strict municipal animal control laws. Unregistered dogs are quickly captured by animal control. The streets are certainly cleaner and safer now, but they are also much lonelier. We miss the quiet companionship of those neighborhood dogs, the silent, loyal friends who belonged to the whole community. Let us visualize the incredible, dangerous balancing act performed by the mothers of the Showa era. Before the strict enforcement of bicycle safety laws, navigating the narrow, rain-slicked streets required immense skill. Do you remember seeing a mother riding a heavy, rusty bicycle in the pouring rain? She would have a baby securely strapped to her back in a thick cloth carrier. With one hand, she steered the wobbly handlebars, and with the other hand, she held a masty, heavy canvas umbrella to shield herself and the baby from the rain. I can still hear the rhythmic squeaking of the rusty bicycle chain and the sound of the rain hitting the taut canvas. Today, riding a bicycle while holding an umbrella, known as sasumata driving, is strictly illegal in Japan, heavily ticketed by the police. Carrying a child without a federally approved rigid safety seat is unthinkable. Those mothers were performing acts of daily heroism, risking life and limb to buy groceries and keep their families running. It was an era of profound resilience, where the lack of safety equipment was overcome by sheer willpower and a mother's determined grip. Think back to the weekends spent at the grand department stores in the heart of the city. The absolute peak of joy for a child was taking the elevator all the way up to the open rooftop amusement park. Do you remember stepping out into the bright sunlight, the air filled with the sweet, spun sugar smell of cotton candy, and the mechanical grinding of small rides? We would sit on the brightly painted mechanical pandas, putting a single coin into the slot, with no seatbelts or safety harnesses to hold us in. The most astonishing part was that you could walk right up to the edge of the roof. The concrete walls were low, and there were no massive glass barriers or safety nets preventing a fall. We would lean over the edge, feeling the wind against our faces, looking down at the tiny cars and people rushing through the streets far below. Today, strict building codes and liability laws require massive safety enclosures, and most of those magical rooftop parks have been permanently closed or dismantled. The unhindered, breathtaking view of the city from the open edge of a high roof is a dangerous thrill that belongs entirely to the past. Finally, let us remember the red or pink heavy rotary dial public telephones that sat on the wooden counters of the local tobacco shops. Before everyone carried a private cellular phone in their pocket, making a phone call was a very public, deeply communal event. Do you remember the heavy weight of the plastic receiver in your hand and the loud, clicking sound of the rotary dial spinning back into place? When you made a call, you stood in the open air. The shop owner, roasting green tea in the back, could hear every word. Your neighbors walking by could hear your laughter or your tears. There was absolutely no privacy. You would drop your large 10-yen coins into the slot, feeling the urgency of the heavy metallic clunk as your time ran out. Today, we demand total digital privacy, encrypted messages, and silent communication. The idea of broadcasting your personal conversations to the neighborhood seems like a violation of rights. But because we had no privacy, we shared our lives. We knew when a neighbor received good news, and we knew when to offer comfort for bad news. We were bound together by the thick, coiled wire of that single neighborhood telephone. As we look back on these 20 fading memories, a profound realization settles into our hearts. We do not just miss the heavy glass bottles, the dangerous truck rides, or the smoke-filled trains. What we truly ache for is the feeling of our youth and the irreplaceable sense of absolute trust we shared with our neighbors. We miss an era where common sense and human connection were the only laws we truly needed to govern our daily lives. The world has undoubtedly become safer, cleaner, and more regulated, but it has also become a little colder and a little more distant. Thank you for walking down this smoky, beautiful, unpaved memory lane with me today. If these stories brought a warm smile to your face, please subscribe to the channel and leave a like on this video. It truly helps keep our history alive. Now, I have an open question for you. Which of these lost rituals do you miss the absolute most from your own childhood? Please tell me your personal story in the comments below. I read every single one, and I cannot wait to share in your memories.